Angela Wilhelms, President and CEO of Oregon Business and Industries, is going to join us. I've asked her to just give a little bit more background about OBI, what they do, maybe a little bit of insight about your own background in policy work. I think it's always good. It's always good. It's helpful. Give some context. So with that, please join me in welcoming Angela Wilhelms.
Yeah, I'm not going to bore you with my info. But thank you for having me here today. And yeah, I grew up Catholic, so I'm used to this. We always filled in from the back forward when we went to church. The one thing I will tell you about myself before I get started is some of you may know this, but the Gallup organization every couple years does a survey where they ask people, the public, what professions they trust the most or the least. And usually battling it out with Congress for the bottom are lawyers and lobbyists. I happen to be both. So you can decide how much of what I'm about to share with you want to, how many grains of salt you might need to add to your lunch. But yeah, I have the privilege of being an advocate for the state's business community. It's what I get to do every day, and I'm honored to be here with you at this gathering to talk a little bit about the necessary imperative we see at OBI, which is restoring Oregon's competitiveness. We actually see it in the context of infrastructure, but we see it in the context of every sector, what's happening in our economy and communities today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We use the term competitiveness very intentionally. We don't operate in a vacuum in Oregon. We are constantly competing with other states, with other countries, for business investment, for talent, for the quality of life that we know and have come to grow to appreciate, those of us who grew up here as Oregonians, and the quality of life we want to provide to the next generation in hopes that they stay, and to people in hopes that they come and continue to make this state a growing and successful and thriving place. Unfortunately, though, and my team has reconditioned me, I used to give remarks like this and talk about the inflection point that we're at. Unfortunately, we are past the inflection point. We're now at a time where it is necessary for the state to act and build a recovery so that communities across Oregon can survive and thrive. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. A little bit about OBI, Greg mentioned. So OBI, Oregon Business and Industry, is a statewide nonprofit membership association. It's a lot of words. Effectively, we're your statewide chamber of commerce. We represent businesses of all sizes. 75% of our members are small businesses. We represent businesses of all industries, and we represent businesses, we have members from each of Oregon's 36 counties. We do wear two industry-specific hats. We're also the state's affiliate for the National Association of Manufacturers and for the National Retail Federation. Those are our two largest membership groups, but the pie is pretty well split among industries. So while we have members, and it's those members that invest in our work and allow us to do what we do, we don't represent our members individually. We represent the entire business community. And we care very deeply about the ability of that community to have sustained success. The ability of businesses of any size to build livelihoods, innovate, to strengthen communities, and to grow the economy. So I want to talk about a premise that we sort of take to heart at OBI, and it feels a little ridiculous to say, but the private sector is effectively what makes it all work. The number of times I've had to explain this premise to people in policymaking positions since I started this job 4 years ago is shocking to me. At the end of the day, it's the private sector that generates jobs that allow for individuals and families to prosper, generates corporate and individual philanthropic opportunity, and ultimately that generates the tax revenue that supports and sustains communities and states. You guys know this, I know that. You're in this every day. But we often have to root our conversations in this premise because, again, far too many have forgotten. So I'm gonna forewarn you, I'm gonna go dark for a little bit. I'm probably not going to tell you anything you don't know, but I think it's important to talk about it. So in Oregon, when I lived in DC, forgive me, when I lived in California, forgive me harder, and when I travel around the country, I used to say I'm from Oregon. People are like, oh my God, you're so lucky, that's so awesome, it's so cool, it's beautiful, it's thriving, I want to be from Oregon. I'm like, yeah, you do. Today, when I travel, and I say I'm from Oregon, and I'm not talking about the reputational stuff, because I agree sometimes people have a very false idea or an overblown sense of how things are going in some of the communities. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the circles I run in the business community, the business investment, the economic development circles. When I say I'm from Oregon, I always get this, oh, how's that going? What's going on out there? Have you heard about this company that wanted to build there and ended up, I'm like, yeah, stop, I've heard it. We've lost our mojo. Webster defines mojo as a magic talisman or charm. We had that. We still do, frankly. We've lost a little bit of it. We've certainly lost the ability to sell our mojo. At OBI, we think these are 5 of the contributing factors. You might have your own, you might disagree with these. These are the 5 we tend to focus on because of the nature of our work. We were a state where Republicans and Democrats worked together to solve big problems, where we could make massive investments and get projects done. We have a hard time doing that anymore. We tend to bucket this into 3 problem statements. And when we released the Oregon Competitiveness Agenda, these are the 3 problem statements we said the state really needs to pay attention to. It's an expensive place in which to live and operate a business. We create unnecessary obstacles to success. And frankly, and importantly, the political culture in this state simply undervalues the private sector, and enough is enough. We have to change these things. You don't have to take my word for it. It's probably very predictable to think the CEO of the state chamber is saying something like this. This is what I do. But I want to go through some research. I'll go through it really quickly because my guess is you've seen some of this and you can follow up, and I'm going to leave time for some questions. But first, let's start with CNBC's annual Top States for Business ranking. Not that long ago, we were 17th. Above average, pretty good, take it. In less than 10 years, we plummeted to 39th. 11 of those places we fell in 1 year. From 2024 to 2025, we went from 28th to 39th. We're 47th in business friendliness. Now, we do a couple things well: innovation, education, though I'm not sure we're going to be able to sustain that high ranking for much longer, given the scores that we're seeing. Infrastructure, we're actually above average and pretty good, but that means in some of the other categories, business climate, tax environment, regulatory environment, technology, et cetera, we're so far down the pile that we drag our entire ranking from 17th to 39th. Ernst & Young does a tax study for us every couple of years that looks at the overall effective business tax burden. We released this report last year, so it's based on 23 tax data. From 2019 to 2023, the state's effective business tax burden, I'm not even talking about Portland, the state's effective business tax burden increased by a full third in 4 years. That is enormous pressure to put on businesses in a short amount of time, while, other costs were rising as well. This is the report. How many of you heard the statistic over the last year that Portland is effectively the highest taxed city in the country from an income tax standpoint? Has anybody heard that yet? Some of you good. That was this study. We say effectively because Oregon's personal income tax rate is about 0.25% lower at the highest level than New York City's. Portland's kicks in at $125,000 in annual salary. New York City's kicks in at $25 million. We like to feel we're on safe footing saying that we're effectively the highest taxed city in the country. At $25 million, I'd happily forego an extra 0.25%. The bigger problem with the tax report, and EY doesn't get into this because they just do the objective math for us, but the bigger problem, what we hear from businesses and from individuals, from families, from main streets across the state, is that people don't feel like they're getting what they've paid for. Oregonians have consistently showed a willingness, as long as it isn't a sales tax, but a willingness to support higher taxes, to invest in things, to pay for things that they believe are important to the community. But now people feel like they're not getting what they're paying for. We're upside down in this equation. Okay, so let's look at a study that was released by Business Oregon earlier this year. We'd had a lot of conversations with them, and I appreciate supporting the partnership we have with Business Oregon to dig into this issue. Anecdotally, we hear a lot about businesses leaving the state. There isn't any one thing, you guys know this. It's not like a bill passes and the next day a bunch of businesses close their doors and leave. That's not how it works. Businesses try to stay and hang on as long as they can. You never know which straw is going to break the back. You never know when that time is actually going to come. But the bigger thing we're seeing isn't just closures, it's sales and consolidation, and it's growth elsewhere. And that is a really big problem for the sustainability of the state's economy, when local companies are choosing to grow somewhere else. So the University of Oregon did this study for Business Oregon, and what they did, and I really encourage you to take a look at this if you haven't, it's on Business Oregon's website, it's on our website. What they really did well is they looked at what they call the anchor factors, which are really kind of the emotional, familial ties, reasons why businesses stay. And then they looked at the push and the pull factors, the policies that are driving companies to look elsewhere, and the things other states, going back to that competitiveness bend, the things other states are doing to pull business away. We hear this all the time about the proactive advocacy other states are doing to recruit businesses. So when we talk about maintaining the status quo, that is not good enough. We have businesses actively choosing to leave for reasons that we can point to policy about, and we have businesses actively getting recruiting. To maintain the status quo is actually falling further behind from a competitiveness standpoint. And again, it's unsustainable. One of the push factors in that report that IPRE did, and they leaned in a little bit to this in the narrative that they wrote, something we've studied with our members. We issued a report earlier this year on regulation. The regulatory environment is a problem in this state. We did a survey of small businesses, more than 500 small businesses, and more than 70% of respondents said that they felt the rules changed too fast for them to keep up with. More than 70% of the respondents said they felt like state agencies cared more about finding fault than helping businesses succeed. This is not a culture where we can reclaim our mojo, where we can restore competitiveness and ultimately grow the economy. We have to take a look at this too. The study here, I want to point out, no, sorry, we're still back on. Oh yeah, no, sorry, regulation. There we go. They all start to look the same after a while. This study here, we used, other state chambers have used them for a study. It's a group of academics on the East Coast, and they have this extraordinary model they've built out. And they're able to start to quantify the impact of regulation. Now look, regulation isn't bad. Most regulations are well-intended to start with, and some regulations are absolutely necessary to level playing fields, to protect health and safety and the environment, et cetera. We do not balk at the idea of a regulatory scheme. What we have a hard time with is the constant layering on and never reviewing for what can maybe be pulled off. The adding more without modernizing what we have. There is real cost associated with this. Real cost, both cost to consumers and cost to jobs. You guys, I know, are mired in this all the time as we think about how to navigate business development, economic growth, infrastructure projects, et cetera. One of the other shocking things, and there isn't a slide about this, but I encourage you to take a look at this report too, that we looked at is we really wanted to understand where we sat relative to other states. And when you look at certain industry, take metals manufacturing, for example, which is actually a really important part of our economy. People don't like to talk about it because you can't manufacture things generally without burning some fuel or using raw materials, but it's an important part of our state's economy. We have something like 700 times the regulations on that industry than the US average. When you look at environmental regulations and you look at the US average, state of Washington is, a lot of people would compare us politically in values. They're pretty close to on par with the federal average. For the number of environmental regulations, we're 50% higher. So we don't take exception to the necessary fact of a regulatory scheme. We just want the state to look very closely before it adds new ones, and very closely at what we can modernize. For example, there is no requirement for an economic impact report or a cost-benefit study before regulations can be adopted. We feel like that's a pretty basic step forward. Regulatory agency can still adopt them, but let's have an honest conversation with businesses, with consumers, with taxpayers about what we're doing and why before we keep doing it. Okay, that was my soapbox. I promise that's the longest slide. Okay, the state's own economist is starting to see this show up in the forecasts that he delivers every quarter. The most recent forecast was just a couple weeks ago. It was the September forecast at the end of August. Oregon's growth is lagging the national average. We lost 25,000 jobs year over year. It would have been higher, frankly, but we actually added quite a few public sector jobs. Jobs are jobs. I'm in for jobs. I'm not sure how you pay for increasing public sector jobs in an income tax-based state when you have decreasing private sector jobs. The math doesn't work. We have to figure out how to restore private sector job growth. This is starting to become a little apparent. For those of you who track these forecasts closely, you'll know that Oregon's indicators sometimes lag. So when we look at unemployment and a map of Oregon that has unemployment right now by county, one county was flat. Every other county saw unemployment grow year over year. The state unemployment rates crept up to 5%, the highest since the summer of '21. Doesn't appear to be slowing, it's gonna get higher. It's gonna get higher, and we have to figure out how to grow private sector jobs to prevent that from happening. The forecast we just looked at, quote, "The most severe declines in employment have occurred in the manufacturing, construction, financial activities, wholesale trade, private education, and information sectors." Those are sectors that pay, on average, more than other sectors. So not only are we losing raw numbers of jobs, we're losing well-paying jobs, jobs that come with commercial insurance through employers, jobs that support communities across the state. The state economist actually has said that we're in a manufacturing recession now. And when you consider that manufacturing is one of the most productive sectors of the economy, and we're one of the handful of states that's a net export trade-dependent state, this is a very serious issue. So these are just some of the reports and statistics that have come out in the last year that I think bolster what we're trying to get across. This path, and I've said it multiple times already here today, is unsustainable. The status quo will not work. The people in this room, and you guys are in positions where you're working with private sector. Some of you are in private sector companies, and many of you work with private sector companies all the time. We have to demand better. We have to demand change. We have to talk about this stuff. It is uncomfortable. People don't like to talk about this, but we have to. We have to, because those of you who grew up here know it, and those of you who came here for a reason know it. Oregon can and should be better. There is no reason we shouldn't once again be a beacon for jobs, and for people who want a strong quality of life and an ability to prosper individually. We have to do three things to do better. First, I said it, we have to acknowledge and own what we're not doing well. We can blame other people We can point to federal chaos. I'm not saying it doesn't contribute to what's happening. But if we don't own what we're doing as a state, we're never going to do better. We sort of have to stop adding more harm than good to the equation. And we have to prioritize business and economic development. So I'm going to touch on each of these a little more really quickly. First, acknowledging the problem. You know, this is something that I am constantly shocked at how much people don't want to talk about this. We have looked for places where we can get good data on a regular basis and haven't found it. So next week, actually, we haven't showed our board yet, so it's private for another day. But next week, we're going to launch the scorecard, and I encourage you to take a look at it. These pages on our website will have no opining. We have plenty of pages on our website for that. These will just have data. Bucketed, you can see the categories here: business, climate, education, et cetera. Because we believe it's important for Oregonians to have a one-stop shop where they can see how we're doing on whatever it is they think is important: housing prices, GDP growth, job creation, education outcomes. I don't care what you prioritize. But I want people to be able to know how the state's doing. So it's got trend lines, and we're going to keep this continually updated because we have to talk about it. Second, we have to do no harm. I don't know how many of you, there's various versions of this quote, but I like the cartoons, so we're going to go with the cartoon one. It feels like it softens it just a touch. I don't know, maybe that's not true. If you want to get out of the hole, you have to put down the shovel. We need to stop and focus on the things we're doing that we need to do better before we try to cover up those problems by doing more. We're very good at passing bills, implementing new programs, patting ourselves on the back, and not tracking the outcomes or lack thereof. We got to stop. We got to stop doing that. We got to go back to the drawing board, the programs that aren't working, and make them work better. And it's okay to say, Uncle, we're going to wait a little bit before we implement more and more while we figure it out. Remember that statistic about 70% of small businesses thinking they can't keep up? This is part of that. Got to give everyone time to breathe and do things well. And then we're in a position to do more. And third, we refer to this as the fourth goal at OBI. The governor, and I have told her this personally, I will say this, when she started and prioritized 3 goals, I was very happy because she had too much to do to not focus. And so I applauded her effort to stay focused. And I told her, great. I hope that economic development becomes your 4th goal as soon as possible. And I'm going to give it about 1.5 years before I kind of get annoying about it. She laughed. We're 3 years in. We need a 4th goal. We're a $140 billion enterprise, the state of Oregon. The 4th goal has to be business and economic development because we can't pay for the other 3. We can't pay for any of it unless we do this. So we're trying to be helpful. I promise I don't just run around the state talking about all the bad statistics. The competitiveness agenda is our list, a long list of things that we would start doing differently. Things that we would change, things that we would improve, things that put us on track, looking at best practices in other states. I am not going to read it to you. It is long, but I encourage you to take a look at this. But I do want to just highlight the 3 themes that we went through in the competitiveness agenda. First, we have to modernize agency rulemaking and permitting. I hear it everywhere. We can do better here. You guys are important to that. Your feedback, your insight, your information, your ideas are necessary to getting this done. We have to remove unnecessary barriers and establish a welcoming environment for business. We got to stop sending the wrong signals to other states. We have to tell them we're open for business and we're willing to do things maybe a little differently to compete. And we have to make Oregon more affordable and improve the tax climate. That doesn't just mean lowering taxes. Sometimes it means not raising them. But it also means thinking holistically about tax structures, the layering effect. Fees are a form of taxes. How do they fit into the equation? We have to think about this holistically. But affordability extends beyond that. What programs have we put in place that are actually going to raise consumer prices? Those aren't taxes per se, but they're costs, they're affordability problems. What processes do we still have in place that maybe drive up the cost of housing, et cetera, et cetera? So again, your input, your feedback, and your pressure on policymakers to change these things is really important. This is an economic imperative. It's frankly an imperative for the future of the state. So why am I talking about this at an infrastructure summit? One, because I talk about this everywhere I go. No one can stop me. Once they hand the mic over, it's a problem. The main thing, though, is infrastructure is important. And some of you are probably going to say there's two camps here. Some of you are going to rightfully argue that in order to reverse the trend, in order to attract business to compete, we need strong infrastructure, that we need to build the infrastructure, the if you build it, they will come mentality. If we don't have raw material, if we don't have roads upon which we can move finished goods or raw materials, et cetera, I hear you. And many of you will rightfully argue that we can't build infrastructure without a healthy private sector to pay for it, to fund it, whether directly through taxes and fees or indirectly through wages that allow individuals to pay taxes and fees. These aren't wrong. This is the chicken and egg problem. But I'm going to tell you why I lean into the camp of we have to fix the economic problem first. That's my lens, and it's because without a healthy private sector, we can't sustain whatever it is we build. So we look at this as the house of cards problem. I don't want to build this. This is not good. This is not going to sustain. It's not finished. It's kind of we could unpack a whole session on whether this is a good metaphor for where we're at right now, but I won't do that right now. I want to be this. We can't do this without a healthy private sector to underpin the work. And so that's why we are so focused on restoring our competitiveness so that we can pay for this, and why we're so focused on doing things differently, doing things better. Thomas Edison once said, vision without action is hallucination. We're pretty long on vision. I applaud that about us. Always have been. We need some action. And we're not going to see action unless people in your positions across the state demand it. So I'm asking you to join us in demanding action, demanding a restoration of Oregon's competitiveness so that we can build literally and figuratively the future that we not only want, frankly, we need. I don't want to go anywhere other than those two, mistakes in DC and California. I'm a lifelong Oregonian. I want to stay a lifelong Oregonian. I want my family to stay here. But to do it, we have to fix this problem. And to do that, we need to work together. So that is my soapbox. Thank you for letting me share it with you. I'm happy to take any questions. I think we've got 5-10 minutes, Greg? Yeah. So we've got a few minutes left. I'm happy to take any questions if you have them. If you don't, that's fine too. Lunch looks great. But I think there's a couple microphones out there. Yes, ma'am. Oh, she just has a mic. Got it. Yes, sir.
Testing, testing. There it is. First of all, thank you for saying what you said, and thank you for saying it in this room of all rooms. I really appreciate the message that OBI is sending. My question for you is, maybe not so much specific to how OBI plays a role, but how communities, voters at the local level are going to begin to associate a lot of what you just talked about with what is happening at the federal level and point the finger there. And I'm curious, what can we do as Oregonians to not overcorrect by thinking, because there's a dumpster fire happening in DC, that we need to respond with more regulation, we need to keep doing what we're doing to protect our status quo because of what's happening globally?
Yeah, that is a great question. And look, I'm not gonna opine on federal policy. It is what it is now, and there are things each of us can do in our roles individually and professionally to try to influence that. So I encourage you to do what you think is right there. The fact of the matter is, our slide in Oregon was happening before President Trump was reelected. It was happening before tariffs took effect. It was happening before the confusion of the tariffs even started. It happened before H.R. 1 passed, let alone before we see the ramifications in the state. We are where we are today in large part because of state and local decisions that were made before this. So your point is really important, that it is cathartic to point fingers. It is important to not let bad federal policy off the hook, and we have a delegation to work on that. But it is equally as important, if not more so, to look here and say, we have to take care of our own house, because it's a mindset. And we cannot let the deflection and distraction of pointing fingers to DC let us off the hook at a state level for the things that we own and can change. Cool. Before I leave, one quick thing. OBI, as a state manufacturing association, every year, we're only in like our third year, so if you haven't heard about it, that's okay. We do a coolest thing made in Oregon competition. I'm totally changing subjects here. Because it is important that we celebrate the makers and innovators that we have as an effort in part to keep them, but also we make some really cool stuff in this state and communities around the country. So today, we launched voting for the 3rd annual Coolest Thing Made in Oregon competition. It's a, I'm not allowed to say this, a March Madness style bracket, where products compete head-to-head with each other. So we have 16 finalists. I encourage you to Google Coolest Thing Made in Oregon and cast your vote. Every week or so, we advance to the round and announce the winner in October. So it is important that we lift up from these conversations and remember to celebrate what we have and who we have and the work that they're doing. So that's one small way starting today. I hope each of you will do it. The list really is scattered across the state, so you can all find I guarantee you'll find a product that catches your eye. So I encourage you to Google that and participate in the voting to help pick the 2025 Coolest Thing Made in Oregon. So with that, I wish you good luck with the rest of the conference, and thank you very much for letting me speak with you today.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you, OBI, for your partnership with this summit. You've been a supporter and an organization that helps market this to a pretty broad audience, so thank you. With that, we have about 15, 20 minutes or so before the next breakout sessions, and then we'll be back in here for the closing session. So don't forget to be up front, because there's going to be a good giveaway or two, so you want to be right up front. All right, thank you.